wasn't sure what to talk about today because there's so much to talk about and I could be here for hours. And I'm already going to change what I was going to say anyway. So I am a mother of 3 girls, twin 10-year-olds and a 12-year-old. And my youngest twin, by a minute, has, when she was 4 years old, was diagnosed with combined attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is ADHD, a mood disorder, and combined anxiety disorder. And I'm sure some of you have had you've been around either peers who have had ADHD or have friends whose children have them. And much like autism, ADHD, they have a lot in common, which is why I'm here. Not only do I have experience with autism, but I also have it with the ADHD side of it. One of the biggest things that they have in common is that the children suffer from social inabilities that most kids would naturally have. Can you go back a couple slides to the one where it had like the therapy thing on it? This one. So over here where it says the early signs, the bigger difference between like an ADHD and an autism is the delayed speech and the rejecting cuddles, because autistic people, their feeling when they're touched feels different than when you're touched. To them, sometimes their brain almost accepts it as being painful. It's like they're in their own little bubble and they feel like you're invading their space. They need the personal space. For ADHD children, they don't have that, but the playing alone, hyperactivity, and the sleeping problems are very common in both sides. And a lot of that stems from the anxiety side of it. Imagine yourself holding your breath underwater and someone holding you under the water. After a while, you're going to start panicking, right? Because you can't talk, you can't yell, you can't say what it is and you're gonna start panicking. That's what these children feel, especially the nonverbal autistic children, because just like you saw with Carly, she can't tell them what she's actually thinking and feeling. A lot of autistic children compare it to a brick wall. They're in the wall, they can see out, but nobody can see in. They can't talk out, they can only accept in. There has been no studies that have found a way to break that wall. I've had a student with autism every single year I've taught, and different variations of severity of autism. When I taught 3rd grade, I had a boy who was, we're gonna call him Sean, and he was nonverbal autistic. And I remember I told you about their touch is very different than our touch. Sensory for them is hyper focused. So if you may feel the carpet one way, but for them it could feel like spikes, or it could feel very soft, but their feeling is more intense than what you're going to feel. So a lot of times autistic kids either prefer to wear shoes because they don't like the feeling, or they prefer not to wear shoes. This particular student loved to not wear his shoes. And he was really funny in the mornings. He'd come in early, and I always knew when he was in my room because there'd be a shoe, a sock, like leading right into my room like a little breadcrumb train. And I had a little couch, because they were 3rd graders, I had it really low on the floor. And he would love to just go and throw himself on the pillows and just lay there. And he could never talk to the kids. He could only make noises. But his acceptance in my class and with his grade level was something that I'll never forget. We're talking about 3rd graders. So their social abilities at 3rd grade's pretty, they're still learning at that age regardless. But to see their acceptance of a kid or a peer like this was amazing. We would do our morning circle, we'd sit, talk and introduce and do our what we always do every morning, and he would sit there, and he particularly liked to sit next to this little African-American boy whose head was mostly, he had just like little stubs for hair. He loved to sit next to him because he loved to rub his head. He loved the texture of his hair. And this little boy would lay his head on Sean's lap, and Sean would just sit there and rub his head. And I mean, I wouldn't even see normal third graders doing this on a regular basis just because, you know, they're so macho. But this was how my class was. We would invite him in to do science experiments and activities that most kids, you know, a lot of teachers were afraid to invite these kids in to do because it was scary for even a teacher to deal with a child who can't talk. But really, they're no different than any of us. They still, and actually, I kind of think, and in my experience, I believe they're actually smarter than us. I have one this year who his severity of autism isn't as severe as the nonverbal. So he's perfect, you know, he's an AAP. He's actually 3 years ahead in math. So it's one of those things where you wouldn't really know he had autism except when he tells you. And he really wasn't keen on telling people. He didn't like being pointed out. And I have 3 other kids in my class who have ADHD. So it's a very interesting class this year. And right at the beginning of the school year, I like to promote acceptance. I teach my students that it doesn't matter where you come from, who you are, what abilities or disabilities you have. We're all a family, and that's it. Like, there's no questions about it. And so 3 of the kids who had ADHD, I have that connection with them because my daughter has it, and they have very similar anxiety issues. They show very similar social inabilities, and so instead of them feeling scared or left out, I promote it. Like, I was like, you know what? I would always tell them, you know, Addison has that problem, or Addison does this, or Addison's my daughter, sorry. And they started to realize that they're not alone, and they had a personal connection to that. And then they all go, oh yeah, I do it too, and I do it too. And even kids who didn't have any of these disabilities started to realize they had very similar social anxieties, but they can overcome it differently than the kids who have these disabilities. So my kid this year, who has autism, he wanders around my classroom, and he will like stare over people's shoulders, and he gets super focused on a calculator. So I'm trying to teach them science, and he's super focused on just punching numbers into a calculator. And at this particular day, he was in the back of my classroom organizing the tissue boxes, which the repetitive nature of anything calms them. It makes them feel more secure. And so I let him do it. Oddly enough, this kid can be reading a book and still absorb every single word I've said. So I let him do this because I know it makes him more comfortable. So we were talking about how different we all are. We were talking about different things that we've all gone through. And one of my kids who had the severe ADHD was saying, you know, you guys don't know what it's like to be in my head. I think of one thing and then the next thing I'm on a different topic and I can't keep up. And I said, yeah, it's a lot like autism. And my sweet little boy stands up and he goes, I have autism. And I wanted to applaud him because I knew how much that took him to do, because he really never liked to advertise it. And I told him, I said, I know. And funny thing is one day, somebody with autism or ADHD is going to figure out how to cure out all of the things that we have. They're gonna figure out world peace, they're gonna figure out a cure for cancer. And he kind of stopped and looked at me and I said, you know, think about all of the abilities that you have and that kids like you have. And they started to stop and reflect on the positive sides of their disabilities, not such the negative side. Not the point that people stare at them or are irritated with them or don't want to be around them. And it's not, and I say irritated, and I say it in such a serious manner because it is. These kids will have a friend or lose a friend just as quick as you breathe. Because their abilities to talk or do things is so much different that a lot of times the kids their own age get irritated with them and can't stand being around them. And so another sign of autism and ADHD and all of that is they thrive on children older than them or adults. I often have very adult conversations with my student this year. And they're very mature, he speaks more eloquently than some of the teachers in my school. But that's because he thinks at a different level, and it's harder for him to be with somebody his own age because they're almost a maturity level below him, which is odd. But like I said, these disabilities make them more advanced. But the problem is so many times they don't either have the focus or the ability to get it out of their head. So like I said, he's 3 grade levels in math ahead. He's gonna be pretty much out of high school level math by the time he's a freshman. And the way he can do math isn't normal. Like when we teach you 2 + 2, he looks at it in such a different way, but he can do it so much faster. And he's able to speak and he's able to get it out of his head, but there are kids who have all these answers that we've been fighting for years to figure out. They're in their head and they can't get it out. And it's fascinating to watch them put it on paper and to be able to do it because even as an adult, you learn new ways of doing things through these kids. And being accepting and actually just taking a breath and sitting back and looking at these kids from their point of view is so much more important. It's gonna be easy to just avoid them or not play with them or not invite them to your birthday party because you're afraid they're gonna embarrass you. My daughter does not get invited to things very often. Her peers really alienate her. She was originally at another school with her twin sister, and that school was like half the size of Flores. Their class sizes were like about 17 kids. And imagine you being purple and your sister being a normal color. And everybody wants to be with your sister, but they don't want to invite you because you're purple. And you're just invited because you're your sister's twin. That's what she was going through. They'd invite her sister, who was very social, like she's a social butterfly, she gets along with everyone. And Addison has a hard time doing that. So they would say, hey, come to my birthday party. I guess you can invite your sister because she's your twin. And so Addison never had her own friend group. And so I moved her to Florida so that she would have her own community. And when you ask her who her best friends are, she would tell you it's one of our music teachers or one of her other specials teachers, because that is who she thrives for. Like she accepts adults better because her peers alienate her, even in a different school from her sister. She's not able to do tasks just as quick as, so if I tell you to stack the chairs at the end of the day, she may stack a couple, but then she's gonna get distracted. And the kids get irritated with that, and then they don't want to talk to her, and then it just becomes a snowball effect. And she usually, just like the boy in my class, usually lets it roll off her back. She's not really acute to it, but lately she has become more because acceptance has started to dwindle. And same for the kid in my class. He's been at this school since he was in kindergarten, and the kids are starting to get irritated with him, and it's starting to become more of an issue for him because they're at the point of where acceptance is starting to dwindle. And I think it's because we're starting to focus on so many other issues that we're not going back to the same, we're all different no matter what, and we need to understand the other side. I would say pretending remember holding your breath underwater and not being able to come out is probably the best thing to remember when you meet somebody who's different. Doesn't matter if they have Down syndrome, autism, ADHD, any of those disabilities, there's always something that they're fighting to figure out. For you, under the water would be trying to breathe. For these kids, it could be talking, it could be just being around you, it could be accepting someone just touching their arm. For some kids, that would set them off screaming, as if you were punched in the face. To them, just touching their arm gives that same reaction, and they just scream, because they don't have the ability to just say, you know, I need my personal space. So I think the biggest thing to remember is that everybody has a quirk. We all do, no matter what. None of us are perfect. We all may sneeze funny, cough funny, may not be able to spell, may not be able to do math, or be able to write a paper. We all have something that we struggle and are learning to do, and it's the same for these kids. They go through therapies to learn how to possibly even speak. Some of them don't. Some of them have to do it on a digital board. Some of them, it's just a matter of being able to sit in a class for a few minutes longer than what they were before. Sometimes with these kids in kindergarten, they come in for 5 minutes, and their goal in school is just to be able to sit in a class for 15, 20 minutes by the time they get to 6th grade. It's a very slow process, but it's process. They're getting somewhere. And as a mom who sees this in her child on a daily basis, it makes me mad, because you just want to go up to the kid and be like, what are you doing? You need to see that she's not this person that you're making her out to be. But it's hard, because as a teacher and the person, I've done a lot of research on this, and my doctoral research was on this, and we went through 3 or 4 different types of introducing these kids to social skills, bringing in parents, bringing in psychologists, bringing in school counselors, different programs in the school. And every time there was not one way that we could get every single kid to be more socially accepted. It's just how it is. So bringing awareness to it and bringing acceptance to it is going to be really the predominant way to get these kids into society on a normal basis. So if you see one in the store, just remember in the video that people were staring at her because they could see that she wasn't like her sister. And so they noticed that. Like I said, they can see out, but it's hard for them to speak out. And they know people are staring at them. They know people are irritated with them. And what is the worst part is when they finally find that voice and you hear just about how much it hurts them. Because it's like being shunned by your best friend. You just want to be accepted, no matter what abilities they have. So, you know, smile at them. Instead of seeing a kid with disabilities and you kind of stare at them, smile at them. I always try to smile, just because I may not be able to speak to them, but I want them to know that they're no different than the other kid in the other aisle in the supermarket, you know. Just smiling at them, they may not know you, but they're gonna know that you're being friendly. Smiles are smiles in every country, every language. Just like saying hello. Hello is, you know, happiness, all of that. Doesn't matter where you're from. It's positive behavior. So no matter what their ability is, just being nice and friendly and smiling at them will get somewhere. It will make them feel good, even if it's for the day. They feel like they weren't looked at or looked down upon when they can go to the supermarket. So I really think that's the biggest thing. Like I said, remember how it is to be underwater and you can't breathe. I think every time you see a kid like that, just remember that's something, speech or texture or something to them, that's how they feel. That struggle and anxiety and panic. And it'll be surprising as you look around and see how many more of these people are out in society. You'll be surprised just how many are there. And I promise you, in 20, I would say maybe less than 20 years from now, it's gonna be another Einstein. It's gonna be another Thomas Edison. And ironically, Einstein had autism. And look what he did. So, like I said, someday, they're going to figure this out, and they're going to find a way that these kids can speak, and it's going to be amazing. We're going to finally have answers that we've been working years and years on. So just remember that in a few years when you hear that, you're gonna go, oh, somebody told me that way back in 2020.